Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So today we are taking an objective, highly focused breakdown of a genuinely provocative theory about artificial intelligence. Now, whether you're an AI enthusiast, a digital creator, or honestly just someone navigating this rapidly changing internet of ours, you've probably wondered about the sheer scale of how massive AI models use human data. Well, today we're looking at a specific, totally fascinating critique from our source material that actually compares modern AI data scraping to Marxist economics. Yeah, you heard that right. We're going to map out exactly how this argument works, step by step, to make this complex theory crystal clear. Okay, let's dive right into this. AI is being deployed as degenerate intellectual communism. I mean, wow, that is a heavy, loaded phrase used by the source to describe our current technological era. No, our goal today isn't to take a side or, validate this label, but to really pull it apart and understand the specific mechanics and the economic theory driving this bold claim. How exactly do we get from algorithms and chatbots to 19th century political economy? Well, let's find out. To make sense of this critique, we're going to walk through a fascinating logical progression. First, we'll examine the great data vacuum. Then we'll look at the copyright loophole. Third, we'll get intellectual communism explained. Fourth, we'll explore the contradiction. And finally, we'll tackle the incentive problem. All right, section 1, the great data vacuum, training on humanity. So the crucial point we've got to establish first is the immense scale of how these models actually learn. Our source describes this as a massive vacuuming up of human intellectual activity. Think about it for a second. Books, social media posts, recorded thoughts, articles, random forum posts, even your 3 a.m. Reddit rants. If it was recorded and accessible online, it was likely absorbed into the machine. But the primary issue the source raises here isn't just the ingestion itself. It's the fact that all this data was utilized without any system in place to track the original creators. If an AI gives you a brilliant, highly useful negative information today, it's hopelessly impossible to figure out which actual human being originally came up with that insight. And because of this, there's zero attribution and absolutely zero financial compensation given to the people whose intellect built the foundation of the model in the first place. Moving on to section 2. The copyright loophole, laws from another era. How exactly is taking all this intellectual property legal? To understand that, we have to look backwards. And this brilliantly illustrates the timeline of the disconnect. Decades ago, our intellectual property laws were written for a completely different reality. Fast forward to the past 20 years, and humans have generated billions of pieces of digital content. Tweets, blogs, comments, essays, you name it. And today, AI ingests practically all of it totally unchecked. The source argues this is just a massive legal loophole. The rights you would technically need to grant a company to ingest your entire digital footprint, they simply didn't exist, because when the laws were written, this state of affairs was literally inconceivable. Now you might be wondering, what about the law? There is some legal pushback right now, but as the source highlights, it's very narrow. Sure, there are massive class action lawsuits involving tens of thousands of books being used by companies like Anthropic. But as the source notes, books are easy. They are countable, quantized items with clear authors and registered copyrights. The vast majority of our digital human content, the everyday things generated outside of traditional publishing, remains entirely unprotected by current law. Think about it. If a super influential idea from a copyrighted book gets discussed and debated across social media, the AI can just reconstruct that exact same idea by reading the free social media chatter, leaving absolutely no legal fingerprints behind. Okay, section 3. Intellectual communism explained, the central theory. Having established that all this data was taken for free, we can now look at the core economic analogy the source uses to describe this whole situation. Let's formally define this term exactly as the speakers in the source material use it. They call it degenerate intellectual communism. This is the theory that AI ingests human intellect based on ability, meaning it happily takes the absolute best, most insightful ideas we produce, but it fundamentally fails to distribute the resulting benefits back to the public based on need. Let's break down exactly how they map this out. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between the classic Marxist maxim and the source's ironic view of current AI deployment. The classic theory of communism relies on the famous phrase, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. The source argues that AI companies have basically perfected the first half of that phrase. They've taken from each of us according to our ability. If you post highly insightful things, your work is heavily utilized to make the AI smarter. If you post useless things, well, it gets ignored. So they absolutely take your ability. But the second half, to each according to his need, That is completely subverted. Instead, the reality is, from each according to his ability, for a fee. Which brings us right to Section 4, the contradiction, paying for your own intellect. Let's look at the deep friction pointed out by the source regarding who ultimately gets access to this tool. The source outlines this deeply frustrating three-step cycle. Step 1, creators, writers, and everyday people put their heart and soul into their digital work, usually completely unaware it's going to be harvested. Step 2, AI seamlessly ingests this high-quality work to drastically improve the capability of its own model. Step 3, when those exact same users or creators actually need to use the top-tier, smartest version of this AI, they're forced to pay a monthly subscription fee to a private entity. You literally invested your intellect into the machine, but your needs are deemed unimportant unless you open your wallet. So how in the world do we fix this contradiction? Well, the source briefly floats the idea of a digital Bill of Rights, basically a brand new legal framework to address how our intellectual property is used in the age of emergent AI synthesis. However, even the source openly admits that figuring out the actual legal mechanics of this is incredibly difficult. Actually, scratch that, it's practically impossible right now. We are dealing with emergent properties of data, not just copying and pasting, which makes our old legal frameworks pretty much useless here. And finally, Section 5, the incentive problem, game theory and human excellence. Let's look at the game-theoretic impact this dynamic could have on human society moving forward. The source draws a direct line between the historical, physical failures of communism and the potential intellectual failure of this AI model. In their analysis of history, Marxist systems fail because they punish the productive and reward the lazy. If everyone gets the exact same outcome regardless of their effort, the incentive to produce just vanishes, right? And that results in empty supermarket shelves. Well, the source applies this exact game theory to AI. Highly productive people have their intellectual labor ingested for free. Lazy people contribute absolutely nothing, but they can just pay $20 a month to consume this synthesized genius of others. Over time, the incentive to do the hard, grueling work of producing excellent original thought completely disappears. It creates a massive collective action problem where humanity's intellectual output drops to zero. As the source powerfully states, it disappears the incentives to be excellent. This is their fundamental warning, guys. It's not just about kids cheating on their homework. It is a much deeper structural problem. If you live in a system where an AI machine constantly synthesizes human knowledge and can phrase your own insights back to you better than you could ever articulate them yourself, it can be deeply, deeply demoralizing. Why do the hard work of thinking? Why strive for intellectual excellence at all? Let's move to this slide and see how this builds into a final stark contrast. The source argues that a proper market system, despite all its flaws and potential for rent-seeking, fundamentally incentivizes the creation of value. When people are incentivized to create wealth, everyone generally gets wealthier. You produce value, you get rewarded. Pretty simple. But this degenerate system of AI deployment, it does the exact opposite. By severing the reward from the actual intellectual labor, it completely removes the incentive to learn and create, which the source fears will result in a massive, collective societal loss of human excellence. So I'm going to leave you with this final, incredibly provocative thought from the source material. If we are truly heading into a future where AI has ingested all of human knowledge and is permanently the smartest kid in the room, what is your personal incentive to learn? Why study long and hard to see a subject with clarity when a machine can instantly outperform you without breaking a sweat? It is a heavy, fascinating question about human drive in the 21st century, and it's something we all need to deeply consider as this tech becomes our new normal. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.